You know, I'd like to make a pretty bold proclamation here today, and that is healthcare is really sick. In fact, I would suggest that healthcare is in critical condition.
Healthcare is very complex, and there's no way in a modern healthcare industry you can function on your own. Each cog in the wheel is so vital. If one of those cogs is loose, it's like a house of cards.
It's unequal in the way it delivers value to patients. It's become a profit-centric industrial monster.
The healthcare industry is the largest industry in the United States. That speaks volume about the cost of healthcare. Healthcare was meant to solve health problems, to be for the patient. That critical component is completely missed.
Everybody in this system is rewarded to do something to you. How do we get to this?
Healthcare's lost its soul. Healthcare has lost its mission and vision, which was to heal, comfort, and care for the sick and the infirmed.
All communities deserve the right to have access to healthcare.
To fix healthcare, we need to fix health.
Can we cure healthcare?
After years of researching and pondering that simple question, I believe the answer is yes. Yes, we can fix healthcare. I discovered an incredible big shift that must occur in order for us to avoid the massive collapse of our current hyper-interventional healthcare system.
Starting out as a technologist with over 40 patents, writing best-selling books on the topic.
Every day, I would wake up and find ways to invent stuff that I got paid for that treated sick people.
I've been involved in healthcare, traveling all around the world, sharing my ideas with some of the most esteemed audiences.
You know, as a young kid, I was always interested in innovation. I remember inventing my first meteorological instrumentation, and I really was excited about the fact that I got to participate as an innovator in healthcare.
I had the opportunity to travel to Dublin, Ireland, to share my ideas to the world about all that I knew about how the next bright, shiny object was going to really solve all the problems. And at the end of that presentation in Dublin, Ireland, I met Dr. Power. He came up and interrupted a dialogue I was having with 15 people and he said, Nick, it's about the patient.
It's interesting when people seek to differentiate between connected technology and artificial intelligence on the one hand, and the deep and meaningful relationship that physicians have with their patients on the other hand. They're two peas in a pod. The tech and artificial intelligence is a wonderful enabler, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It's that the foundation stone remains this deep and meaningful relationship between the physician and the patient.
After listening to his perspective, I began to realize that he was so right. There's really no way that we can fix healthcare without looking at the relationship between the caregiver and the patient. That's the genesis, that's the beginning of all the things that we need to do to really make healthcare work for everyone.
I think that there's an opportunity today to be able to reimagine healthcare in a way that's fair, in a way that is personalized and customized, and most importantly, safe and efficacious.
When I was in the midst of the beginning of my career, I knew that I was well trained to take care of patients and get them through their journeys. I was a general surgeon practicing all aspects of general surgery.
I loved to teach, and I saw medicine as a great opportunity to be a teacher. I remember even bringing that up in my med school interview about how I like to teach, and it was true. That's what got me into it. When I sort of got into the real world of medicine was a big awakening. I was hoping to be, more of this one-on-one time with patients. It really turned into getting to the next patient, to the next patient, to the next patient, and then gradually I realized I had lost control over my life.
When I went to medical school and residency after medical school, it was intense. You're seeing the sickest of the sickest children. I was expecting every day I'm going to be saving lives.
The doctor-patient relationship, it's been devalued. To see us as technicians and chart entering data people. Healing wasn't part of what I was doing every day with my patients. I was being a technical surgeon, I was providing state-of-the-art care, but something was missing, and it was that piece of the relationship which I realized I needed to nurture more so that I would have more fulfillment in my career.
If you take an appointment that, maybe you schedule appointments every 10 to 15 minutes, let's take a 10-minute appointment because the math is easy. Well, that means you got 5 minutes talking to the patient, and that includes the time when you're taking the history, maybe doing a physical exam, and then counseling.
In the mid-90s, I was doing all aspects of general surgery, and in the midst of my initiation of that part of my career, I had 2 friends, both physicians, one diagnosed with a brain cancer and one diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. It was like getting hit by a 2x4 upside the head. You realize that Western medicine didn't have the answers to those questions that were being posed to you as a physician. These are doctors, they had the access to the best and the brightest and the newest technologies. I questioned everything that I had ever learned because I couldn't help save some of my colleagues.
I think medicine has to kind of look back a little bit. When it was family physicians were the doctors that took care of you, went to your family doctor, and the family doctor got to know you and your family, and they followed you for years, and they said, you're just not the way, what the heck's going on here?
I probably didn't think about aspiring to the lifestyle of a GP. It certainly wasn't glamorous growing up from my dad. Our house was the traditional doctor's house and still is in the middle of a village. There was 2 front doors. One was into the house and the other was into the surgery directly. So there was no really proper waiting room or area for a nurse or anything like that. As children, we were very much involved. I remember once years ago, I was probably about maybe 12. My mum had probably popped out to the shop next door, so I answered the door. Dad was going off on a call, and it was a patient kind of going, oh, listen, Jimmy's stuck a pitchfork in his leg, what will we do? Will we take the pitchfork out or leave it in? And I thought, and I said, I think you better leave it in. Which I think was probably the right answer in retrospect, but I'm not sure they really should have been asking a 12-year-old for their opinion. But I think a lot of rural GPs do quite a lot of house calls still, but we'd be in the back of the car, and in the nice house calls, we'd get invited in and have, a glass of orange and maybe a biscuit while he was seeing the patient. And then in the not so nice kind of ones, we'd be sitting in the car with dogs jumping up at the window.
I think there's a healing quality of being in the room with someone who you have confidence in, that they have expertise, they have your best interest in heart. They're going to maintain confidentiality, so you can say whatever's on your mind and not worry about it.
Being a family physician really does require you to take a lot of responsibility. It attracts, not just for lifestyle reasons, but it attracts a certain type of personality. Somebody who really nurtures relationships.
Having a person feel like, I've got a human being who asked me how I'm feeling today, and they meet it. Not filling out a form, sitting in the waiting room. I'm not against those. I mean, that data is important, but we need to make sure we never lose sight of the fact that we are social animals.
Lots of times if patients feel like they've been listened to, that's just half the battle for them. I think that's the real cornerstone of the relationship. And then I think the next thing is trust. But I think those 2 things are really hand in hand. I think if someone feels like you've listened to them, they're much more able to trust you.
It's really that getting to know someone. Getting to know someone involves time, and it involves access, and it involves trust, and it involves really good communication.
A doctor in Bellevue, Iowa, small rural community in Iowa on the Mississippi River. Doc was one of those old-fashioned doctors that carried a doctor's bag from farm to farm, and he loved them and cared for them as if they were family. He saw them as constituents, that he was there to serve them. And he knew their kids. He even knew what their stressors were so that he could mitigate and leverage the challenges of stress and mental health. You were lucky to be one of Doc's patients. You were lucky. not just because he was well trained. It was because he had the tools and he had the time to deliver quality care. Interesting thing about Ireland that I discovered in researching Ireland is that they have some of the best healthcare in the world. One of the biggest problems in Ireland, and we see it here in North America as well, is that we've got great interventions. We're really good at fixing broken people, but we're really bad at keeping people healthy.
2011, I contracted swine flu, or H1N1. I was relatively young at the time. I was 43 and fit, and it knocked me for 6. I was intubated and put in an induced coma for 28 days, so it was a long road to recovery, yeah. I went into hospital, but Maura was right there. When you're moving maybe from one hospital to another for treatment and then returning to your own hospital, you get lost in the whole system, and it's your GP who's on that journey with you.
You know, I've learned through a lot of my patients, like Loretta, as much from them as they have from me. We had kids the same time, we were pregnant the same time, we discussed school options, and we actually developed a really close friendship, probably more because I was quite vulnerable with her as well, and she would have known some of my, I had difficulties over the years, and I would have been open with her about that, and we started having a more social relationship too, and she's now one of my closest friends.
Over the years, I began to recognise that she's the type of woman I like. She's the type of person I'd like as a friend. And you build up that relationship where you begin to realise that they have ups and downs too. I consider her one of my best friends. And I think I admired her as a person. I thought she's my type of woman.
As a GP, you provide that care that starts from the cradle to the grave, you know, and I think that's what I've loved about it. I now have patients that are coming to me as adults who I knew first as children, as babies. And the other thing is, it's a huge privilege to be allowed into people's lives in their most vulnerable times, in their most exciting times, and in their most sad and upsetting times as well. And I think that's what I love most about it.
In order for healthcare to heal, I think physicians need to heal themselves and recognize that nutrition and exercise and a spiritual practice and some aspect of figuring out who they are inside, why they went into healthcare. To me, healthcare it's an art. There's the art and the science. And we've gotten so far to the side of the science in healthcare that we forget the healing art.
The burnout rate right now for doctors is at the highest it's ever been. People are choosing to pass because they originally wanted to go into healthcare to impact the quality of somebody's life. And then the system that they work for says they've got 3 minutes.
28 to 29% of resident physicians, guys right out of med school, they go to residency, then they go to practice. Guys in residency, 28, 29% were frankly depressed.
So many physicians are burned out. They aren't exercising. They're not eating a healthy diet. They're not having any kind of spiritual practice.
When we look at the statistics, they're incredibly sobering. Approximately 1 in 2 physicians will experience burnout throughout their career. The majority of physicians will not recommend that their sons or daughters go on to pursue a career in medicine. So the signs are there.
The ecosystem of healthcare just doesn't change fast enough. It's a very embedded system. Right? Healthcare policy is not quick to change. There's reimbursement, there's legal, there's just habits.
This is a huge problem for both patients and for doctors because fundamentally, unhappy doctors leads to unhappy patients, and unhappy patients leads to worse outcomes.
In med school, we learn about the model of depression. If you shock the rat, it jumps. Well, if you run a continuous current, eventually the rat just lays there. And we're sort of the rat that's just laid there because we're getting this constant shock. And that's sort of how medicine is.
What we were trained to do was to treat diseases. We were trained to find a solution to a problem without potentially not fixing the problem, just putting a Band-Aid on. I started to take a look at the psychosocial, spiritual side of healthcare. I became very interested in prevention, and so much so that it inspired me to become board certified in integrative medicine.
There was a big push towards that the patient needed to be pain-free. Having someone be completely pain-free might not be a reasonable goal if someone has terminal cancer. That has led to some overprescribing of very potent pain medications, the opioid analgesics, and this I blame the educational system on.
Even in osteopathic medicine, there's a big emphasis on drugs. You spend a lot of time on all the drugs, and when you learn a drug, you learn all the adverse side effects from them. And especially if you put 2 drugs together or 3 drugs together, you don't know what the reaction is going to be for a particular patient. So you're really courting a lot of problems. And if that's your level of education and you don't really know anything else, what else can you do but prescribe a medication?
When I go in and they try to push these pills on me, I'm like, why do I need all this? You know, it's like, you should take this. This is going to help you. And then when we give an opinion, it's like, no, trust me, just take this. And I'm like, why should I take this? Because, you know, 3 other people just took the same thing.
They just need to keep on going. It's like a factory. Okay, someone's sick. They don't really care what exactly it is. Let's just give them something.
I remember I really wanted to talk to a therapist about something. I made a psych appointment, and within 10 minutes, I realized they had made an appointment with a psychiatrist instead of a psychologist, and he was like already trying to medicate me. And I was like, no, I don't want to be on medicine. I don't feel like I just wanted to talk to someone about something.
So how do we get to this? I think it might be useful to share with you the trajectory, really, of how we got here in the first place.
It really began back in the caveman days when primitive first aid that used sticks and rocks to control bleeding and to fix broken legs. In other words, we were really limited to just rendering basic first aid back then.
We transitioned into a new phase, and this new phase was infectious disease. So we began microscopic and biomedical knowledge. We began to understand the systems of the body, from pulmonary to neurological to circulatory systems. And because we had developed biological knowledge and we started to understand the human systems, we could see stuff like viruses and bacteria. And at that time, we started to create vaccines and antibiotics. Tens of millions of lives were saved during what I call the infectious disease era. But then we started to try to build out some sort of an economic framework around healthcare to this new state of hyper-intervention. The more we can intervene, the better. How long can we keep people on medicines? How can we use this medicine for something else that people think that they need to treat themselves for? We're getting sicker, and the healthcare industry is more than happy to give you the next purple pill.
I actually intended on becoming a doctor. So I went to undergraduate at University of Colorado in Boulder in molecular biology and chemistry. And then I went into the hospital to have a baby, and I came out completely disabled. At the same time, there was a lot going on. I was diagnosed with the worst kind of breast cancer you can possibly ever get. The oncologist that I worked with in Seattle told me things like, when I asked, well, what is the percentage chance that I'll get cure? She basically said, we're not even going to talk about that at all. All we're going to talk about is that this is going to cure you. We are talking cure. And to have an authoritative voice tell you that, and to emphasize that and give you that hope was amazing. Here I am going through the worst kind of chemotherapy regimen you can go through, and not knowing if it's going to work or it's not, if I'm just destroying my immune system or if it's going to work. I went to a sensory deprivation tank, and it's completely silent and it's completely dark. And I just connected as deeply as I could and just envisioned the tumor's melting away, and just allowing myself to come into healing. And after 20 weeks, I got an MRI, absolutely no evidence of disease. And then I really sat with, what do you want to do next? Why are you here? Why did you live? Why were you, quote unquote, saved? Why were you one of the lucky one that got, pathological complete response? What's up? And I recognized that I could be first a living example of, guess what? Even if you've got the worst kind of breast cancer, you can live. In order to heal myself, I had done all the medical things you could possibly do. I mean, all the surgery, everything, the physical therapy, you name it, I'd done it. But there really wasn't much more that could be done to get me back to complete health and well-being. So I dove into the very deep end of the mind-body pool and began doing everything under the sun. And so I ended up becoming a nurse and ultimately a nurse practitioner because I wanted the medical piece. I wanted to have a holistic functional medicine practice ultimately that used all that mind-body work but combined it with Western medicine. I believe people can get hope, and I think that's one of the most beneficial things to all of this is hope. So I think you have to have time with people, and you gotta have upfront prevention. Otherwise, you're gonna be throwing Band-Aids on people at the speed of light, and it's just gonna keep building like that.
About 10 years ago, my whole life was changing. I started to have symptoms. My left leg, it just got super swollen. We went to an ER, we went to clinics, and nobody knew what was going on. There's also an element of doctors not thinking that I knew what was going on. When they said lupus, I got tunnel vision. You know, they keep talking to you. At a certain point, you stop listening because your whole life is changing. It was a lot to handle all at once. And I think it feels really scary when they give you that diagnosis and then it's kind of like, okay, that's your diagnosis. Thanks for coming. And there's not always, okay, well, what do I do? How do I live with this? I didn't feel any patience. I didn't feel any warmth. I had maybe 20 questions that I had written down, but I was bumping up against their next appointment. And instead of just asking them those questions when I thought I was just gonna get kind of a canned response, it's definitely not easy. I have to get blood drawn every 3 months. I have had more radiation exposure than I want to think about. Like, I don't really know if I can have kids right now because I've had so many CT scans and it's really scary. It took me a long time to find people that care and that make me feel like, oh, this is something that you have, but it doesn't have to define you. And that's kind of a cliche I heard a lot initially in the support groups I'm in, but several years into living with this, I'm starting to understand what that means. I said, okay, I'm gonna take this into my hands and I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna find a team of doctors who cares and who I can tell looks at me as a person who has this illness, but I'm not a number, I'm not a patient number. So I have a new general practitioner and she's been my doctor for about a year now. And we have an actual relationship and it has changed my life. She cares about me and she knows me and she immediately got in contact with all of my other doctors. She's somebody that if I have questions, I can just message her in the portal and she'll answer me the next day. And having someone where it feels like they're on your team and it feels like you have someone in this fight with you, because it often feels so lonely, it just makes such a big difference. And I am so grateful to her. And then because of that, anybody that she refers, I'm gonna see. I don't question anything that she does. You know, we have back and forths if she's talking medication or if she's talking, but I know that she hears me. And it changes healthcare. It changes it from like a subordinate position of power doctors to like, all right, let's put our heads together and let's figure this out.
To me, every good doctor, whether it's a surgeon, an internist, fill in the blank, they all have one thing in common, a genuine sense of concern for the patient.
I believe compassion is everything in what a doctor does. If you don't have compassion, how can you really help people? And so sometimes you're tired at the end of a day, and I have to remember by the 28th, 30th patient of the day that I need to be just as on and compassionate at 8 o'clock at night as I was at 8 in the morning and fresh, because to this family, this is their pride and joy, and their concerns are my concerns.
In the last year, I've had a serious illness. She was the one to whom I picked up the phone the minute I realized something was wrong or thought something might be wrong. Picked up the phone, made an appointment, and sort of handed it over to her then. There was a lot going on in my life at the time. My daughter's wedding was within a day or two, but I had handed it over. I knew I was going to be seeing her a week later, and that allowed me to sort of get on with my life and enjoy the big event and so on.
From the very beginning, she was very clear that the relationship she wanted with me was as a doctor-patient relationship, not as a colleague. Now, obviously, you do make some concessions when you have a colleague with you, but personally, that's also the way I would treat any doctor coming to me. And I'd often be quite clear with that, because not every doctor who's a patient is the same as Bláthnaid. And some of them almost feel a little bit affronted that you're explaining things to them like you're a patient. But I'll be quite clear and say, look, in this situation, I find it much easier if I treat you the same as any other patient. I'm going to assume you know nothing about what's going on, and we'll start from there.
And even through the illness, even though I wasn't seeing her, I was in touch with the practice, because they would be providing my certs for work. That's the way it works. So I'd be in touch with the girls at reception, or maybe emailing about that. But on one occasion, she phoned me just out of the blue, and I was really happy that she did. It was just a testament to the fact that she really I was there in the background, and that she cared.
In lots of ways, you kind of have to leave your own ego a little bit at the door. So you have to respond to what the patient needs from you.
As a doctor myself, I guess I'm very aware of the fact that we can neglect our own health, particularly at very busy times in our career path, or when life and career are busy at the same time, which can often happen. In my own practice, I see a lot of doctors in distress who haven't really at any stage thought about their health, and then suddenly something goes wrong, or maybe they're even so caught up in work and life that they don't even realise that they're in trouble until something goes wrong.
Desiree has a number of concomitant health conditions which are complex, not just complicated. And for us to create an environment for Desiree to feel well, to be well, and to stay well, it really requires a team-based approach. She comes in for her injections every week, and she feels empowered, and she feels like she's in charge, and she doesn't feel dependent. She's independent. She's 92, she lives alone, she walks her dog every day, she's sprightly, she's sharp as a tack, and she's still living life to the full. That's wellness. If Desiree was going from one specialist to another specialist to another specialist, that's a sickness model. It's not joined up. It's not cohesive, and it's confusing. It's confusing as a family physician because you don't get the information sometimes from the specialists. Certainly very confusing for the patient because they're lost. They're lost in the system. We all know her by her first name. We welcome her. And that's socialization for somebody who's living alone. That's about pouring fuel on wellness.
I think physicians now, we need to understand that we need to incorporate all the marvelous technology that we have available to us now. Beyond what I ever would have dreamed about when I got into the field back in the early 1970s now, I hate to say. If you don't have that, I'm not so sure you're ever going to be as good a doctor as you could be. And I think this is what patients are going to need as we go to more telemedicine, telepsychiatry. I mean, these are important things, but one of the things I worry about is how do we use those and not lose that sense of connectedness?
These diseases or different conditions that doesn't affect a lot of people, the business case sometimes doesn't justify developing the cure or the tool. Having been leading a breast cancer business at the time, I knew that there was deficiencies in the innovation and the tools that the surgeons just didn't have until it became clear that there were specialists in the area. And once the market realized there were specialists, then they put their money behind it.
I would receive a sheet every day as a medical product developer. It was a sheet on CPT codes. CPT codes are a code that tells you the most money you can make through insurance companies and third-party reimbursement. In other words, every single day, my job was to wake up and make stuff I made the most money for. I spent 4 decades of my life thinking that I was using my God-given innovative powers in a way that was good.
The machinery of the modern medicine monster gets bigger and bigger. New diagnoses, new drugs, new cross-indicational uses for drugs, more. Technology is going to have a phenomenal role in the big shift of healthcare. But we can't just focus on sickness intervention. We really need to use technology as a preventative tool and an interventional tool when necessary. So it's not technology versus prevention and wellness. It's the thoughtful equilibrium between those two incredible forces.
We're going to have the capacity moving forward to do a much better job of monitoring how things are going. We need to make sure that we use these wonderful technologies. The patients can monitor themselves, we can help monitor them, and that will allow us to make wiser decisions on where do we intervene.
The patient isn't completely blameless in this scenario. 80% of the cost in healthcare isn't greedy drug companies. It's not greedy doctors. In fact, they're just as much of a victim as the patients are. It's self-inflicted, in many cases, chronic disease, or what we call lifestyle disease.
When we look at healthcare currently, the greatest drivers of cost are a range of chronic medical conditions that are largely preventable. In essence, if we do not address the burden of disease from a preventable disease set, we will run into increasingly expensive problems within healthcare.
We are the worst country in the world. We spend more money on healthcare, but we're the most unhealthy society that there is because we've not been holding anyone personally accountable for their healthcare.
Think about that. We can reduce healthcare costs by 80% by getting people to a healthy state. That virtually all chronic disease is almost exclusively weight, but there are other lifestyle disease. You know, we're eating our way, we're drinking our way, we're smoking our way, and we're setting our way into chronic disease.
Instead of saying to someone, listen, you know, you're 40 pounds overweight. Can I give you a drug to treat your non-insulin dependent diabetes? Absolutely, and I might have to as a bridge to get you back to that place where you can reset your thermostat, reset your homeostasis, and actually get to a place of health and well-being.
The temptation is to add more doctors, to add more hospital systems, to add more beds to hospitals. But this will never work in the long term. There is an endless amount of money we can put into the resources of healthcare, but without fixing the preventable chronic conditions that we see, that we know that are preventable, we will never be able to fix healthcare.
When you take a look at the epidemiology of chronic disease is really the biggest disease of our time, and it has to be eradicated in order for us to make healthcare affordable. But here's the caveat to that, is that if you live in a food desert, in an underserved community, and you have no nutritional resources, it's not really your fault. And if you take a look at wealthy people, they all have concierge health. They go to their doctor and spend an hour with their doctor, right? Why can't we provide those resources to underserved communities?
Areas in which deprivation and poverty have been endemic for decades, for generations, are those which classically follow the inverse care law. Those who most need it get least of what they require. In this day and age, it's simply not good enough to abandon a sector of our population, whether that's by culture or by income or by language. We have to find a way to provide equivalent or better healthcare to those who need it most.
As tempting as it may seem to ask people to adopt more responsibility for their health, we need to meet them where they are. We need to see where they are in terms of their socioeconomic status. So for me, to ask someone to eat healthily or to exercise more is not going to be a very effective strategy for someone who has 2 jobs, is getting very little sleep, and has very little money. So we need to understand the structural factors around people, particularly as it relates to their socioeconomic status, in order to achieve the outcomes that we're looking to achieve.
So I can blame the doctor for this or for that, or the pharmaceutical industry for doing too much medication, an opioid crisis. But really, when I think about myself and my life, it's me who determines my health care, not the physician.
We are not the healthiest of nations, and we need to take a page out of many other countries' playbooks that are doing very well because they have a healthier society. Most people don't understand is they think that they're given the genes that they were born with, And those genes are going to express into some potential disease process. But we have a lot more control than we give ourselves credit for. How we choose to eat, how we choose to exercise, what size we want our waistline to be, how we sleep at night, how we react to stress. We all have stress in our lives, but how we choose to react to that stress can definitely change how our genes are expressed. That is the piece of healthcare that I was never taught about until I sought it out myself for additional education. That is the piece of healthcare that is lacking in the United States. And there are some countries around the world a little bit more progressive, but we miss that boat.
Sometimes when you go in, you have anxiety. Sometimes you don't even want to go because you start thinking like, man, maybe I can't even afford it.
When I got off of my parents' healthcare plan is when I realized that it's not going to be that easy to, have that same level of care that I used to. And then when I couldn't book appointments because they said, oh, we don't take your insurance, or, oh, you have to get a referral first. And, oh, to get a referral, you need to make an appointment with us. The next appointment we have is in 6 months. So it's just like, I can't get anything.
My premium is over $200 a month, and that's the cheapest I could get. And my deductible is $8,500. So I'm paying $250 more than my car insurance. It's more than my utilities a month for healthcare that I don't even get to benefit from unless I reach $8,500.
I was having a lot of breathing problems. When I run, I just feel like I'm really short of breath. I don't have the endurance I used to have. I felt a lot of pressure in my chest. And so I went to see the doctor, and he ran and he did an echo, and he goes, I'm afraid it's your heart. Things are not looking good. In my 20s, I had my first surgery, my 30s, my second surgery, and my 40s, a cardiac arrest and a pacemaker. I remember my mom coming into my room and crying and saying, I'm gonna take you over to the university hospital. And I was like, why? I'm all settled here. And she says, they're gonna transfer you because you don't have any insurance. I felt like I didn't deserve to be saved. I was really sick, and I just kind of needed an angel to show up. And his name was Randy Kessler. I had a lot of problems after the first surgery, and he just kind of stuck by my side. I look back at my life, I look at everything that I endured from 26 on up to now, and it was my heart and all the problems I had with my heart that gave me the best life that I could have ever imagined. He made me appreciate the medical community so much more. Yeah, he was my angel, and then now he's an angel. So. If I had just one more hour with him, that's all I would give my life, just have one more hour.
There are consultants that work in the food industry and what they call the FSR, the fast serve restaurant industry. They've started to realize that the speed of the assembly line of people in a drive-through fast food restaurant can be optimized through what they call throughput analysis and optimization. These consultants are now applying throughput optimization at doctors' offices. In other words, get you in, bill you, and get you out. Now, meanwhile, healthcare is making people wait for 45 minutes. They ask you to fill out a 40-page Department of Motor Vehicle form to ask you everything about you, even though you're their patient. Then you go in to see the doctor, and then they make you sit in the exam room.
I waited 6 hours in the emergency room. I was thinking to myself, why am I waiting here 6 hours? I could have died.
You're waiting there hours to be seen, but prior to that, it takes even days and weeks, sometimes even months to just even, get an appointment.
When I finally did see the doctor, I'd see them for 10 minutes and then they'd be like, okay, 1 second. We gotta get our nurse or something. We have to do paperwork. And then they'd leave for like 15.
Once you do go, and they take you behind and they take you to a room, you're still waiting another hour just to even be seen.
And then a nurse would come in, take my blood pressure, and then she'd leave. And then another 20 minutes goes by, and then the doctor comes back.
In my 30 years of practice, I have seen a change in the amount of time that I can spend with patients, and that's been a huge struggle for me, to the point that I've fought back and I maneuver in ways that I can sometimes spend a little bit more time with a patient, but it's really difficult, very frustrating, not something that I'm at all proud of as a physician, and the healthcare situation right now, that we don't have more time to spend with patients.
For the doctor to just be like, oh, what's wrong with you? Okay, you have a sore throat. All right, let's prescribe you this and this and that, and then go out about your day.
Because it's just quicker. This is the easy fix. We have this medicine for diabetes. We have this medicine for heartburn. So we're not even going to talk about how maybe you can change your lifestyle.
We've created assembly lines of doing stuff to you. So today what has happened is we've created more machinery, more profit-centric mentality. We have more surgeries, more drugs, more interventions, more.
The scariest thing is that I feel the problem is not knowing your patients well or not having a relationship. The lack of caring, and it's just not there.
There's always a situation from a psychological, social, and emotional perspective, as well as the physical, which creates this complex matrix in each individual consultation. And for me, that's the beauty, because it is that you're there when patients really want you, but also they understand that you're there, that you have a presence, you're in the room, and you're not removed emotionally from the experience. Where patients gravitate every time in their hour of need, they always would reference their doc, their family physician, as being their custodian, as being their partner, as being the person who, I guess this is what draws me to it. It's the person who really is at their shoulder when they're sick, when they're vulnerable, when they're exposed, when they're having distress emotionally or psychologically during the inevitable course of our normal lives.
After 20 plus years of working in healthcare and leading medical technology companies, I was laying on a table when a radiologist entered the room and said, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You have breast cancer." At the age of 44, I had to face the reality that regardless of the technology that was out there, my life was at risk. And I remember going through the journey, and it was funny because, here I am, I know about medical technology, I know about reimbursement, I've worked in hospitals, and I remember many times almost living outside my body as I was going through treatment, going, geez, I wonder how much they sell this technology for and what the margins are on it. But it was firsthand experience of how the healthcare system is in so many ways broken. I received care that, was the Cadillac version of care. I knew people in the industry, so it was even better. And I thought how fragmented healthcare is, that even someone who's been in healthcare for 25 years can't even maneuver through their care pathway, and they're confused by it. And the transitions of one treatment to another, and doctor after doctor, and different bills that come in. And you're thinking, is it too much healthcare? Is it too little healthcare? My life's on the line, right? And I had all this experience to go on, but your normal patient doesn't understand that. And it's a scary place. Even when we can say we offer the best healthcare in the world, is that really true?
And in Western medicine, what I have been trained to do is to cut out the cancer and then work with my oncology and radiation oncology colleagues to try to mitigate the chances of cancer coming back with radiation and chemo. What I wasn't taught in my training was how do I educate someone from the initial point of their diagnosis to change the soil of their body that seed of cancer was planted in. Because if I don't change that soil, another seed can grow in the soil and propagate and become a cancer again.
I can't imagine when you don't know who to call. And again, I call myself this spoiled patient, because when I was laying there on the table and was just told this news, I said, just stop right there for 1 second. And I reached to my phone and I picked it up, and the doctor's like, what are you doing? I'm in a dark ultrasound room with no windows, naked from, the waist up. And I start texting. And so I texted the one that all the people that worked for me said was the best. And I texted Dr. Beth Dupree and said, call me. And within 5 seconds, the phone rang. She said, okay, I'll meet you in Philadelphia Airport tomorrow.
Patients will search out a doctor who wants to be their partner in healing, as opposed to someone who just has technical skills. I still do the state-of-the-art surgery. I still prescribe chemo and radiation for my patients. But what they're getting in addition is they're getting Reiki, they're getting guided imagery, they're getting acupuncture, they're getting nutritional counseling, they're getting spiritual counseling, because that piece of healing has been lost by Western medicine. And I want to bring healing back into healthcare.
She was by my side through a bilateral mastectomy, chemotherapy, radiation, and her and my family and my friends and a whole host of doctors pulled me through that year. And I knew there was hope. I'm standing on the sidelines of a lacrosse game, watching my kids play. The kid, it's in between halftime. The kids are running off the field, and I have this darn scarf on. And Beth had given me a ton of big gaudy earrings that I thought looked good with a bald head. And the kids were running by me, 7th and 8th graders, and they're like, Mrs. Foster, you're rocking it. And I thought, I made the right decision, because I just needed everybody to pull me through. And had I not let them in, I think I'd be angry. I think I'd be sad. I'd just be in a whole different place. And how ironic that 2015, diagnosed with cancer, major surgery, and every step of the way, more and more treatment, I learned to live. I learned not to take every day for granted. But I learned about the healthcare system too. And I learned that it's not an easy place to maneuver, and that there's a better way to deliver healthcare.
And it was beautiful because we were laughing and we were talking. And a lot of people say, well, why is a surgeon still involved with a patient? I did her surgery years ago. But that connection was as important for me as it was for her. For a lot of doctors, they forget it and they miss it. And for patients, it saddens me that they don't get that with their doctors, because so many doctors forgot why.
Yeah, it's very interesting in medicine that you could describe as there being both an IQ piece and an EQ piece. There's a scientific piece and there's an artistic piece. It's really interesting when you're trying to get into med school in the first place. It's pretty much that they're talking about IQ. It was all about your scores in the doors.
These poor students are going to go out into the healthcare universe, and they're going to be time-starved, and they're going to be data-starved.
Reflection is at the heart of our day-to-day job. It starts on day one. It's about ruthless honesty in looking at what we do well, what we do poorly, how we can do better.
We're at a very unique place in healthcare right now where everybody's paying attention. COVID got the world's attention, and there's no greater time for healthcare to begin to heal itself than now, where we become a health and wellness providing organizations again instead of disease treatment organizations. There was truly an opportunity. And if the COVID crisis is the opportunity for us to finally get this right and shift out of a disease treatment model into a disease prevention model, then 2020 will have been worth it.
When you hear things like, we demand more health care for the seniors, we demand more health care for underserved communities, I don't believe that's completely accurate. These folks are oftentimes sponsored by the producers of intervention. Of course they want you to consume more healthcare stuff. But is that what's right for your body and your family and your wellness and your health and your longevity? It shouldn't begin there. We want wellness practitioners that happen to have the allopathic power to write prescriptions as needed.
Even though we are seeing a lot of movement, but the goals of those policies, unfortunately, are to make incremental changes. What we are looking for is a disruptive movement.
Why can't healthcare be friction-free, intuitive, and beautiful? Well, let me answer that question. It can. It can, and it will be. It's changing it in a very dynamic way. you, the patient, have power. And that power will continue to grow and grow as we transition into the big shift.
It's working with the patient. It's teamwork. It's working with your colleagues. This is a team sport. Getting the patient involved so they take an active role in their treatment, so they understand why it's important to monitor and let us know, this is how we really improve the quality and quantity of life moving forward.
We're doing the right thing, we're making a difference, and we really have embraced that big shift from a sickness model to a wellness model.
You know, the question is, are we too broke to fix it? Is it possible even to fix it? Yes, it's possible. There is a roadmap, there's a plan for how it can be done. And it really is gonna require a combination of technology, operations, and anything we can do to optimize the doctor-patient relationship.
It would be my dream to know that I changed at least one patient's life. One person lived longer because of something they heard me say and lived by it. I mean, what better joy is there in this world? And I get paid to do it.
I'm incredibly hopeful for the future of medicine. I believe that doctors will be part of that progress, but more so it will be patients. And I think it will be patients who ultimately are the major drivers of that change. And as doctors, we just have to listen.
We work in a profession where everybody thinks you're supposed to, none of us get out of this alive. Everyone expects us to be able to save every patient from everything.
Which is more humane? The automatic prescription trigger mechanism, or the time and the relationship with doc? Somebody that knows me and cares about me and that loves me and wants me to thrive and to be well.
The part that people forget is physicians are spiritual beings having a human experience. And if you don't allow yourself to have that human experience and cry when you lose a patient, and patients don't die because we're not good at what we do. None of us get out of this alive. But the piece that misses the mark so many times is that physicians will separate themselves from a patient.
The doc, the relationship the doc and the community had, that was the secret sauce. And I'm seeking for us to nurture a counterculture back to the future where we're pouring fuel on that relationship. Patients need to appreciate that their doctors love them, that the doctors are willing to vest their emotional energy in the relationship. For me, the healthcare cure is a combination of an approach which is geared more around wellness rather than sickness. It's to embrace and nurture the relationship that patients have with their family physicians, particularly those who have complex disease and conditions who require that multiple comorbidity inputs. Really looking at enabling technology because there's some incredible opportunity now.
I spent 40 years of my life wasted in many ways, just focusing on something that wasn't the next evolution of innovation. I speak on innovation, I write books on innovation, and here I was, a guy, inventing the wrong things. So what if we start to change this conversation and people stop demanding gratuitous utilization and start demanding health? I want health. I want to live long. I want to see my grandchildren. I want to feel good. That's the healthcare I want. I don't want gratuitous trigger mechanisms of darting me to be able to change a range on a lab. I want to be able to be well.
I'm very excited about how family practice in the next 10 years will lead the charge. And I'm already seeing it across the US where the patient-centered medical home, which is doctor-led, and ensuring that it's the right physician in the right place and the right time. And I anticipate that physicians themselves will become the leaders of that change.
I think we have a gift to give to the planet for the rest of eternity, where we can take this as a jumping off point and say, let's get healthier.
In different parts of the world, doctors are rewarded for keeping you from dying and keeping you well. Here, they're compensated to do something to you. In order for the big shift to happen, we absolutely have to change the value and the economic incentive. We have to change the framework. But the only way it happens is we demand from the politicians and the people in charge that we demand fair and reasonable access to health. So we have to change the economic model, and we have to change the value structure. If we can apply as an industry what I've learned about the most successful people in the world, that if every day in every way we're getting better, we believe in our mission in a really big way, and our mission is always in the service to others. What if we made that part of our industry commitment? What if we said, as an industry, as a person who innovates in healthcare, what if we all made a commitment that every day we're going to get better? We're going to learn about all the communities that we serve. We're going to realize that when we serve a Hispanic community or other underserved communities, that we're going to understand them not as a clinical diagnostic node, but as a human that has a different cultural view in the world. Can we know our patients that well and love them that much to where we can understand their unique and special needs? That is getting better every day. That's a mission I would really be excited about, and I know that it'll be an equal and fair service to others. I love that. It actually just gave me goosebumps. I love that. What I want to do is I want to encourage my colleagues and my fellow innovators and regulators and politicians, and most importantly, patients, to join us in a movement where we demand health and prevention and wellness over sickness-centric treatment. We need to change the conversation. I believe that we need to change this into a beautiful mission that is humane and thoughtful and loving, where we support our doctors and we support our patients to reestablish the covenancy of that, a beautiful relationship, while giving doctors mental health resources, giving them nutrition resources, serving underserved communities, not just by disrespecting them with stuff, but respecting them with the same rights that everybody has, and that is the ability to be healthy and well and live a pain-free, long life. You know, as a father of 4, I want my kids to be raised in a country and in an environment where they have access to healthcare and interventions and all of those things. But most importantly, I want them to be part of a system that allows them to have that true partnership with somebody who is a partner in their wellness to keep them from needing healthcare. That's really the ultimate goal and wish that I have for my own kids. And I think we all feel that way. Can we live in a healthcare environment that allows our kids and ourselves to really enjoy the benefits of a partnership in wellness rather than a transactionalist in sickness? Because it's just that simple. Those are our choices.
you.